The session will not be too long. It consists of three parts. One is a presentation on what we have done in our artisan residency program of the Infant's Fields Museum. To those of you new or for the first time with us tonight, we are a history museum about the First World War in Belgium. And we have worked since 1999 with contemporary artists to be included in the main galleries in the permanent exhibition of the museum. And so that's the first presentation, and then I'm very thankful to Chiara Isadora, who accepted to then lead the conversation about that, your comments, your questions, etc. And then there will be, to conclude this evening, and then I believe Dominic may want to add a few words. It's the announcement of the event that we hope, the second part of our contribution to this project, an event which will be live on the 23rd of September, when the present artist in residence, Sami Balogi, who is at this moment in Congo, will be at the museum talking about his project. So I will try and share some of the images, because I think it's already very difficult to talk about art. If you don't have the images, it's even more difficult. So I'll try and, okay, share now, and oops, and I hope you can. Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So let's start. On the left, you see the city of Ypres in West Flanders in Belgium at the end of World War I. This is a photograph of October 1918. To the right, you see approximately the same view of the same city today. So you see everything was destroyed and has been reconstructed. To the left of the main square, you see a reconstructed medieval building, the 13th century Gothic cloth hall, which was a storage of covered market, etc., for cloth during the Middle Ages. And in fact, the greatest Gothic building with a secular function of its day. And today it houses the Infant's Fields Museum, a museum about the First World War, of course, in the city, but also in Belgium, and also a museum about the commemoration of those events and about the relationship that exists between us at the museum and in the city and the vast world out there. As you know, 2/3 of the world population of that moment was involved in the whole event. We opened in 1998, and half a year later we invited a first contemporary artist for a residency. That is, and I'm very glad to see her present here tonight, British artist Val Carmen, with whom I had had the opportunity to work before in 1997 for an exhibition commemorating the Third Battle of Ypres in Passchendaele. And that exhibition was like a fringe program to an international, a series of international concerts, which in those days I produced before I came to the museum. And I like the idea very much of using a different medium to talk about the same things, but I was unsure. I did not know how we would proceed when it came to the museum. And Val accepted not only our invitation, but she tried out various ways of working to try and find out what would be the best format for us. So I am very grateful to this day for that. A first attempt of hers, you could say, had to do with community art. How could art involve the actual community where the museum had its location? She interacted with the public in various ways, asking them to write letters or to create banners or to bring in stuff that they wanted to go into a new archive. At some moment, she decided to occupy with other artists for a very short time an iconic building in the city. You can see it in the black and white photograph. One of the very few remaining buildings standing in the entire city, so that is a restored rather than a reconstruction building. It was a post office. It was to be sold off, and therefore it would going to lose its public function. And Val occupied it to set up a new forgotten archive, if you want, because the old archive, dating back from the Middle Ages, had burned during the destructions of the First World War. With the public, Val collected private and individual memories, I said, and they are in a new closed archive, which is still not to be opened until 2099. So our successors will have a nice job opening that up. A second line of thought that was followed by Val was to comment on other activities we had set up with the museum. In 1999, we paid special interest to the presence of Sikh soldiers in the First World War, a largely forgotten group of participants in the war, and which was at that time, 22 years ago, much more so than today, an overlooked group in the commemoration. Val reinterpreted that with new work of her own. So she made photographs, as you see a few here, that went well beyond the documenting of the events. And she also created a new 3D piece. You can see it in the center here, for the entrance of the museum. So refocusing, adding to what the museum was already doing, but in a completely different way, as an artist, thinking independently, adding her own view to things, was certainly also another medium introduced to the museum. See here a detail in the work. It was like the big Lutchen stone of the British cemeteries, but then reproduced by white building blocks, and squashed between all those blocks was the Indian cotton, of course, referring to the terms of the Sikh soldiers. So a very poignant piece. But the most important thing was then still to come. So she worked very hard during her residency. She made a piece for the heart of the museum, of which you have a few images here. She called it the writing, and it was very fragile, clearly temporary, but very poetic piece, focusing on the official British commemoration, or referring to it. It had hints in its form to the cenotaph, the big historical monument in London dedicated to the victim of the First World War, but also in its materials that referred to the commemoration and of the reconstruction of the front zone after the war. So, talking about materials, the Hopton wood stone used for the headstones in over 20 British military cemeteries in our area here came from a quarry which was just up the road from where Val lives. But trying out these different formats were to me a blessing to find out what would be the best way for our new program of residencies. Um, I had learned you needn't limit an artist who you invite. They can do whatever they want. That is essential. They have to reflect with their art and with their personality to the things they are exposed to. And if I had to pick one of the three ways, then of course, but that had also to do with the practicalities of running a museum. If you're in your financial structure, you are very dependent on ticket sales, well, then you need to bring in the people into the museum rather than outside. But also, I think, in the contrast that was created between the artistic language as compared to the very informative, dense, interactive language of the historical exhibition, then I thought that was indeed a possible winner if the work was good enough. The following year, and I'm not going to go through the whole list, but I think it's important to show different aspects of the artist and public relationship. We invited Belgian artist Belinda de Breukelen, and she started off by come and visit us for a period. It was not so long, but it was very essential. So the residency starts off usually with a period of staying in the area, of visiting the former battlefields, cemeteries, monuments, but also exploring our galleries, our library, and our documentary collections. That winter of 2000 was very cold and wet, and Belinda stayed with her husband and her then very small boy in a tiny little cottage in the countryside, away from everything, and she was quite overtaken by the atmosphere that reigned there. She was trying to express the immensity of the death that had occurred and that she felt was still very present. You must know that in the area of Ypres alone, over more than 500,000 people died during the First World War. And one day, as she was going through the images that she found in the library and in the photo collection, she was struck by images of dead horses, sometimes just a few meters away from the museum. Quite accidentally, she had come across a few days earlier a line in a poem by the Dutch writer Duška Meysing saying, "A big dead horse, that's a lot of death." You see the quote there under her photograph, considering. A man is not so dead. And why is that? Because this is a death without words. The combination of those words and these images gave Belinda de Breukelen the form that she had been looking for to express her feelings. And the rest, I must say, is probably history for most of you, because now Belinda is a very well-known artist, and this format of the dead horse, this form she has been using for more than a decade as an essential piece of her art. But how did it go? How did it come about? Well, back home in Ghent, she started looking at how she could make the sculpture she had in mind. It was a long process that ended with getting the permission by the veterinary clinic of the Ghent University to cast a polyester skin on the cadaver of a horse that had just died. She didn't like that much, but it was the only way. as she had to go very soon after having received the news. But she needed to lay the horse before the rigor mortis would make the body too stiff to shape into the required form, of course. And she hoped she could do with just one such gruesome casting session, recycling the polyester cast later so that she could use it as a mold afterwards, but that was totally unsatisfactory. And if she ever wanted to make more than one horse sculpture, she would have to go back again and again. Now she had in mind by this time that she wanted to create a circle of 5 horses for the space in the museum. And as I told you already, she has never stopped doing it for the next decade or so. So you must realize that this butcher's daughter turned vegetarian, hating the carcasses as they were brought in her father's butcher shop. This was quite an engagement for her as an artist. The next thing was of how to dress these polyester casts, and she wanted to use real horses' hides, but of course not the one from the actual dead horse that she made the cast of, but from horses that had died already much earlier and whose hides had been processed and that she could acquire from a horsehide seller, if that's a word. As she was using only the hairy parts of the skins and wanted to cover also all of the holes on the animal, for the eyes, for the mouth, for the ass, and the hoofs as well. So in order to kind of make a soft, cuddly pet, she needed more than one skin to cover one polyester cast. The process was long, but the final effect was stunning. And it was certainly stunning for our audience. When the work was displayed at the museum in July 2000, it had a tremendous impact. I must say one of the greatest impacts any of the works in this residency program ever had. The reason is that, of course, that the Founders Fields Museum is visited by a wide and a general public, from rather young to old, and from in normal non-COVID years, all parts of the world, all different cultures, and this very diverse audience, which for a very large part knows that it's going to a history exhibition, but is therefore not necessarily informed or educated when it comes to contemporary art. And that was certainly the case so more than 20 years ago. Today, interventions of contemporary art in museum spaces are quite common, but then it was still quite a novelty, and certainly for history exhibitions. And Berlin's was so overtly emotional, stopped people literally in their tracks, overwhelmed by the power of the expression, and as she had intended, so much death. Just look at it. But it brought many people to tears, we must admit. We had to warn the audience at the entrance that they were going to see this, because this was on the circuit of the museum, so it was not in a separate space. It was part of the exhibition people had to walk through. And we had to put up quite strong disclaimers saying that no animal had been hurt to create these sculptures. And the museum staff, frankly, had every day to comfort little groups of weeping adolescents, especially young English schoolgirls, especially who seemed to be massively into horses and who were just overcome with emotions. So the lessons learned from that experience is that contemporary art could certainly work outside of the relatively safe space of a modern art gallery, but it definitely needed to come with a special mediation for a so-called uneducated or an audience, a general public unfamiliar with contemporary art. So that was also certainly something we needed to do, and in all the following years we would bring this forward in the very first encounters with the new residing artist. Some artists were quite reluctant at first. They would say that their work had to speak for itself. But we always insisted that we needed this mediation, this introduction into the format itself, but also into the work, more so than normally an artist would allow to happen. And sometimes, I must admit, we had to write the introductory panel ourselves, but in most cases, the artist would take on board this special relationship between the art and the artwork and the general public, and they would fully participate through the mediation. It made us even think more of what there was in this program of contemporary art that we needed so much to do. Okay, it was about bringing in a different medium into the museum, but it was also inviting the public to allow itself to look differently. As a museum, you always have a very specific voice, and you need to have it. And we should be aware that this is never the only voice. Again, people talk about agonism and multi-voicing all the time these days, not so 20 years ago. There, the museum had its only voice, always somewhat neutral, objective, historically and politically correct. And there was another side to this, of course. We needed to show also to the public that there is the very fine and interesting and thought-provoking subjective voice of contemporary art, and we needed to embrace that and ask our audiences to join in on that. So a great example of an artist, while we finish with Belinda here with a final piece of In Flanders Fields, as she called her piece in 2000, and then a photograph I've taken in the Galleria di Arte Moderna in Rome just 2 years ago, with her piece We Are All Flesh, to show how well known and how essential now this work is to Belinda's work. But a great example of an artist willing to aim just for that special artist-audience relationship was Mark Anstey in 2003. He was very much aware of what his role was to be in the museum. And he thought of creating a work in the museum itself that would be temporary and would not exist outside of the special artist-audience relationship. And maybe I should mention here that the budget we provide for artists is to create, to produce the new work, but is never to acquire the work afterwards. So it remains the property of its creator. And so you could say, well, in general terms, that gives an opportunity for artists to make some new work, So it was, in a way, very generous of all the artists, and there are more than Mark Anstey who have done this. If they say, no, it's only going to exist for this reason, for this residency in the museum. For the in Flanders Fields Museum, Mark made Encounter, a work that reflected on the behavior of soldiers in war. And at some point or other, any soldier had or has, in situations of war, to face, to eyeball, if you want, his opponent. Even within a massed army, there is a very individual, isolated, lonely moment when 4 or 5 or 6 meters away, the opponents look each other in the eye and act upon that. Mark Anstey wanted to show this isolated and lonely moment within the confrontation of two massed armies. So for the museum, he built a wall 4 by 4 meters square and 30 centimeters wide. So now if the 30 centimeters stands for the 5 or 6 meters, the distance of the eye contact, then he knew he could draw the encounter of the opponents by drawing little small soldiers seen from the back, so eyeballing each other across the depth of the wall. And if he did that on either side of the wall, well, you could end up with 2 massed armies, and each time that individual moment. So he started drawing such figures in the museum. He did this for 10 weeks, ending with 2 armies standing on either side of the wall of 9,363 figures each, not reproduced by a stamp or a template, but drawn freely by the artist. As you can see, with a biro pen, he used, I think, 8 or 9 pens during the 10 weeks. The people watched him draw, and while looking on, wondered or discovered what the artist wanted to do. Sometimes they would ask him questions, and Mark would respond. On other days, he would have his headphones on, indicating he didn't want to be disturbed, and then the public had to read the introducing panel to understand, to make up their own mind. But following the action on the biro pen, drawing little figures on the wall, they reflected in that moment on the larger meaning of the work, of course, perhaps also on the reason why they were there, perhaps even on war itself. So I think that was a very efficient way of expressing the brief. When the wall was on either side, it was left standing for a number of weeks, and at the end of the exhibition, Mark deleted each drawn figure with a black felt pen. You see here more images of the drawing and more of the conversation. Then the final day, 9,693 figures on either side, and then after a while, he just started destroying it. He deleted each of his little drawings over 2 days. The following morning, the wall was destroyed before opening time, and that was the residency. All that was left was a catalogue and a short documentary movie by Mark's wife, Gabby Cowburn, of which the stills that I show you here come. And then one piece that is kept in the archives here that we picked up from the ground during the destruction. Another work that played on this temporary thing was Kingsley Baird's diary of 2007. Kingsley is a New Zealand artist, and he was chosen to commemorate the 1917 presence of the New Zealand division in Belgium. And given the far distance between Belgium and New Zealand, the distance to travel. He knew that he would only have one visit, so he had to be coming prepared, not allowing for once that the residency itself should work for him. So he studied the subject well beforehand, among other places also in the New Zealand National Archives. And there he found a number of postcards New Zealand soldiers had sent back home. And quite a few were lushly decorated postcards with Flanders lace and embroidery on it. And that made him think of something he had read before, how Flemish girls and women had made this lace and embroidery, and how, on the other hand, New Zealand women had done something very, very similar when knitting gloves and woolen socks and balaclavas and whatnot, that they would send to their soldiers to protect them against the rather wet and harsh winter cold in Belgium and France. Other archive items he found that were interesting to him were letters and diaries. So when he arrived then, he had worked up his plan, and the full concept of the work was ready. In his luggage were sheets and strips of knitted wool and gloves, and even a balaclava. They had been knitted by a women's knitting circle in Kingsley's hometown in Wellington, New Zealand. And when he arrived, he asked if there were similar clubs of lace-making women. So at the Poppering Art Academy, there was, and there still is, a class of artistic lace making. And to Kingsley's design, they too made small sheets in lace and embroidery, fragments of letters or little designs he had found on the postcards and that had been sent during the war. All that textile that he got from these two groups of women working, and you can see to the left here the historical images of New Zealand ladies knitting and Flemish girls making lace, and then the two present-day groups that were Kingsley providing with all these bits and pieces of textile. So he then drenched these in a wet clay slip that he then burned in a kiln of a local pottery maker. The process wasn't easy, and some of the textile was lost, but where it succeeded, the result was very beautiful, white and quite fragile sheets of clay. They were like the symbolic pages of a diary that formed the center of the piece produced for the museum. The wall on which these pages were hung was painted in pig's blood. That was quite an adventure to get that blood. And the catalogue Kingsley produced was presented as a diary of his residency. So you can see here some of the work of the lace making class in Poppering, and then some of the result of the burnt clay slip figures that came out of it. You see the balaclava there. This is the pig's blood, which was bright red in the beginning, but turned very dark, almost black, as time progressed. At the end of the period of the exhibition, Kingsley had gone home by that time, but he had asked a few amateur archaeologists who he had encountered during his stay here, if they could take the fragile plates from the wall then and bury them somewhere hidden on the former battlefield. The wall itself was destroyed. Again, temporary work that only existed for the time span of the residency. And in view of the artist-public relationship, yet another nature of it, asking members of the public to become part in real terms of the artistic process and creation. Um, and this is, nobody knows where it is but the people who did the digging, but the burial of all these very fragile and beautiful clay sheets. To wrap it up, only 2 years ago, another artist, Belgian artist Fabrice Samin, called upon another specific group of members from the public, as well as from the public in general, in a different context. He looked for volunteers who would like to assist in a special correspondence piece that he called Letter to Pain, to and from the trenches of life. And in a vast body of over 6,000 letters that were written during the First World War and that we have in the museum's collection, Fabrice wanted to find elements, signs, and mentions of joy in the letters that then would be transcribed also by the volunteers. They even counted the kisses that were sent in the letters and reached a total number of over 1 billion, would you believe it? Of course, some of the writers would just say, I send you 1,000 kisses, or I send you 1,000,000 kisses, adding up quickly, of course, to the total number. While they were doing this, one day a week over a period of 4 months, an installation was put up in the museum, and on screen, visitors could see the volunteers at work in the research center, transcribing the historical letters. Next to it stood a desk and chair with paper and pen, and next to that, a letterbox with an invitation to the public to write a letter about their own difficult moments of pain in the trenches of their life. They could post a thematic years about refugees. We will go out looking for an artist who has worked on that topic, or who is likely to be able to work on that topic, like we did in 2004 with Hans Obdebeek. Or if we work about, for instance, another example was that in 2017 we invited a young Black American artist to commemorate the centenary anniversary of the declaration by the United States, the war declaration on Germany by the United States, and as it happened in art history terms, we also had a great bonus there. Not only was the work fantastic, but in his residency, the young artist Wilmer Wilson, the third or the fourth, I forget, but Wilmer had this great objet trouvé, a scarecrow on a farmer's field, and of course 2017 was also the centenary anniversary of Marcel Duchamp's fountain. So another objet trouvé, famous objet trouvé. So I wish Wilmer the same luck with his objet trouvé. So the selection goes both ways. Then what is the way of operating it? Well, it is, as I always found out, an incredibly roller coaster journey, the exchange of ideas and practicalities to solve all the time, every day during the residency. But essential to this, I believe, is that artists allow themselves the time to be overcome by the subject, that they spend enough time with this subject to find out what it is that will make them tick. And all the artists who have done that have done the best work. I can be very honest about that. That's every single time. That was the most revealing work. And bringing in, as you said, novelty in narrative, because that is then when it happens. when an individual artistic view adds to what you may not be able to do as a museum, or you are not able to think ahead, or just not allowed to say before the artist does.
Can I say one moment on the topic of selection of the artist? Taking from your excursus in the most relevant projects of the past, it seems to me that the artists you choose were able in collecting voices, features, testimonies from the collectivity, right? So this was wanted. I mean, did you, in the parameter you use for the choice, you also evaluate the ability of the artist, I mean, the practice of the artists to keep collective testimonies together? Because, I mean, every artist has a specific practice. Some artists also create mostly in dialogue with themselves or with a specific special person like a curator. It depends, I mean, but from what I can see, those artists were considered as open in their practices.
I think open is an essential word, but it should not necessarily be about, I mean, we have a few examples of this because this was focusing on artist-public relation, and therefore, of course, then you have examples of artists who want are able to take in all those collective voices, as you call them appropriately. But that is not necessarily the case. But they have to be open, even if it is to inspire their own work, as individual as it may get. And I think Berlinde is a prime example of that. This had nothing to do with anybody else but her and the work. It was a very individual artistic expression of a very individual emotion, and I think without any member of the public, until she also realized that this was quite shocking to a big number of people. But maybe my examples were too much focusing on say the artists like Val and like Mark, who can take that very well on board, all these voices coming out of the general public and do creative things with that. Does that answer your question?
Of course. Also, I have a personal opinion on this subject about feel. I mean, sometimes also in the very individual path to creation, somehow the collective memories and histories can enter. When you were showing the Berlinde works and process, actually she collected a lot of researches. So in somehow, probably the contact with the you people of the local archives and museums, etc., affected her vision of the history. I also saw her artwork at the National Gallery in Rome. But I have to be sincere, I didn't know that was made in your residency program, but I wasn't able to reconnect it during the exhibition in Rome. So the artwork was exhibited with many others, mostly because of the visual impact, the strong aesthetic impact. Nevertheless, the artwork had something speaking a kind of universal voices, speaking of a universal experience of pain. So this is also the language of the artist, I mean, to bring all of us together in this world of universal experiences, which are experiences belonging to every human being. So, of course, the artwork was very powerful. I didn't knew about all the research and the process during that exhibition. So they probably decided to push more on the aesthetic, on the visual, than on revealing all the process. I can see also from your practices that a longer time to do research, as you said, is quite important. What else are the important elements in the frame of your residency? So how do you organize all the elements? I mean, you said they has a budget. Probably it's also a comfortable budget, I should say. Uh,
Well, Val, was it comfortable? Was it ever comfortable? The budget.
every time we can do better with the budget.
Yeah. I think it's always scraping. I mean, in my experience.
Okay. I mean, if it has to stay there longer, probably you also invest on this operation of the residency in order to give them the comfort to work properly. Also, you said something about one artist, Berlinde, with the baby, that she comes with the baby. So this is also a kind of open mindset. You can bring your family, so you can stay here a little bit more, and this is also a kind of social attention for the artist, which can be a good practice. For example, this is just some example of what I noticed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when you want something that personal, that deeply human, you cannot just be an accountant and just say, look, this is your briefing, and this is the opening night, and this is the budget, and off you go. I mean, it doesn't work like that. But nothing works like that. Not one single day of working in a museum works like that. It requires human involvement and interest, and it always has to come from both ways. From the artist, who has to be very open, and I see where this is going. That there are some artists who are absolutely like locked up in their world, and that it seems very hard to ask for something new of them. But I don't think, and it's certainly not me, I'm not that much a follower of contemporary art. I'm totally interested in it, but I don't have the time to see enough of it. But I can understand that we never are going to choose those hermetic, very idiosyncratic artists who only meet themselves to create their work, and that it's their journey, never the shared journey of the museum and the artist. And I think that is an essential character that you must have, is that you are open to listen to one another, to come to something which is unexpected for all parties, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we will talk about that maybe later. I would love to stay one moment on in order to finish the topic that Nicolas put on the table. I would like to know just a couple of stuff, more technical stuff. For example, what about your staff? Do you have an officer that follows the artist? And sorry, one question before about locations, because I saw different locations used by the artist. So what is your practice? The artist is totally free of choosing a location, and your staff do the most they can to get that location? No.
What I showed you first, outside of the permanent galleries, was only happened in Val's case.
Ah, okay.
It only happened one time, and so then we decided it will be part of the permanent galleries. And as you may know, we have had two permanent exhibitions, one that ran from 1998 until 2011, and one from 2012 up until today. And so that location is different. First, it was under, quite symbolically, under the center of the building, under the belfry tower, and now it's a little bit further down in the permanent gallery. Chronologically, it's better in the exhibition because it is more, it comes at the end of the chronology of the exhibition, and then it talks more about reflection, so it's better there. But I would think that some artists may have preferred the first space, but well, that's what you have. So we limit the artist very much, very much. They have to be accepting to stand down for the, how could I say, the pristine contemporary art galleries that are basically white boxes where you can do whatever you like and it's only dedicated to you. No, they are confronted already with a lot that is going on, and we ask them to be prepared to add even more, and totally contrasting and totally their own. So it's quite challenging. So it deserves a budget which I think was 10 years ago quite generous, but which now I think is we need to review it. The times are not good in that respect. But yeah, that's a different matter.
Okay. So I was also changing topics of conversation. This is a quite intense experience, and now you have 20 years of experience. So what about the audience? Did you notice some reactions, specific, particular reaction, a better loyalty to the museum, for example, thanks to the residency program? I'm just doing some example. I would like to know from your voice some qualitative ideas, observation, let's say, observation on the audience. So how they react to the residency program, generally speaking. During the year, did you saw changes in the audience behavior towards the program? And also if you have some anecdotic moments in relation to the audience answer you wanted to share with us.
To be very frank about this, I don't think we were ever able to tap in on the contemporary art public as such. We have our public, which is a very general public, which is not necessarily interested in modern art. And I don't see a lot of changes there. On the other hand, I see within that general public that they are much more sophisticated. They have become much more sophisticated in the last 22 years. They are able to read better. They are able to respond more as one would expect from an art audience. So it's good and bad. We never been picked up by the big art critics. We've never been really on the circuit of the people who do 20 outdoor exhibitions every summer. That is not for us. Still not. I don't see why, when you look at how interesting these programs are. But maybe there's not enough of it. They are not prepared to take on all the miserable history of the First World War with that one great, glorious moment of reflection on it by a great artist. So that is the downside of it. the pro side of it is that you see, and that is also because contemporary art as an intervention within museums of all kinds is getting more and more accepted. And so also a general public is now prepared to stop and look at it and think about it. So it's good and bad, but you could say from an economical point of view, we never reached out to a new audience, never, and we have to be honest about it. So yeah,
But
that's our experience.
yes, Nicola.
May I ask you, I like what you said about the frequency, but I would say that since it's you're doing this contemporary program for quite many years, 2 decades or more, can I ask you if there are other types of temporary projects or exhibitions that you also present? I'm sorry, I don't know your overall programming, but I'm wondering if you could see difference in the public compared to the rest of your programming, like I mean between contemporary art programs and something else that is also temporary.
Well,
If you know what I mean.
yes. We have historical exhibitions about one of the topics that will be dealt with in the permanent galleries, but of course only briefly, like an introduction to it, and then you make a big exhibition temporarily in a temporary space we have. But we have never used that temporary space for big art exhibitions, with 2 exceptions where we gave like to older artists, like how could you say, an overview of all their work against war, and it's 2 times that happened, and because we don't have the budget to set up a full art exhibition with all new works by the artists in residence. If you have to fill a complete empty space using all work coming from the residency, then we would run out of money very, very quickly. And so that's why we haven't done that. But maybe then you have more to offer, and maybe then the art public would love that. Or you could come then decide and say, let's do group exhibitions where new work and old work is combined, as is happening quite often. And then maybe we should have, with the known names and the new names, we could tap into the audience of art lovers in general, who would then just come for that and be able to escape from the horrors of the war in the permanent galleries and just go and see the art exhibition in the temporary exhibition space. But we haven't done that because, I mean, our task is to be a history museum and not an art museum. So we use art in a very specific way, and I am the most grateful person to all the artists who have joined in, with 1 or 2 exceptions where we didn't quite match. It's always been a great adventure to do it, and the result, I mean, I didn't follow at all this year's residency, but Dominic can maybe say a few things about it. But the joy of seeing it last night, only last night, is tremendous, just because you realize that somebody has given his best to do something new and added something to the narrative that we are conducting.
Pete, I have a question for you and Dominic. So it's more a curiosity, but if you close your eyes, which one is the audience of your dream? Which one is the audience you desire to gather to the museum, specifically thanks to the presence of contemporary artists?
Well, the audience of my dream would be the combination of the 2 audiences, of the art loving public and of the history loving public. I would like them to join more. Um, and I don't feel it as a personal failure. We tried very hard, but to be honest, we haven't succeeded. Tony?
Yeah, well, I think I'll give you a personal example. My brother-in-law is an art curator of contemporary art exhibitions, quite large art exhibitions. He has never been to our museum to see the artist in residence, even if some of these artists are sometimes included in his exhibitions. And it's just, I don't want to use the word snobbery, but I mean, there is some, it's a bit like Pete said. I mean, a lot of the audience that goes to contemporary art exhibitions only goes to contemporary art exhibitions. And actually in the museum world, there's this large divide between historical museums and other theme-oriented museums who have to tell a story, and the art scene, and crossing the bridge, linking the two, is hard work and is not evident at all. So I joined Pete in the hope that that will be possible one day, or that more people who only go to the contemporary art exhibitions will come to see our museum. But it is a difficult. But picking in what you just or what Pete said, yeah, about the creation of new art. I think the most lovely moments or the most lovely evolution is when you see that what you offer the artists as to the landscape where it all happens, the collection, the narrative of the museum, when that starts fermenting when you see that creative fermentation going on within the artist, and he starts exploring all ways, and then that enhances, and you see something happening, and that's magical.
Basically, you are describing the creation of a creative nest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something which has a kind of osmosis perimeter.
Yeah, and with this subject, as Pete has given the example of Berlinde, but I'm pretty sure, like our artist of this year, Sami Balogi, it's the same. I mean, he, during his quite short period that he was able to work here, he has made a lot of footage, he has explored a lot of things, which he hasn't even used in the work of art he created for the museum, but where he told me that, oh, I will use this for a long time to come. So you see that is also part of it, that even if we do not directly reach that public that we want to reach, that niche public, in the end, we will get there with our message, but indirectly through the works that some of these artists continue to make based on their experiences during the residency.
Personally, I'm learning a lot from your experience in this moment. I can see how you design the perimeter of this action of residency, and it's quite important, in my opinion, to keep this exchange of impressions and practices. In my opinion, this is my opinion, it's evident that you accomplished the audience engagement process, actually. Probably you see a margins of improvement for the audience development process, but actually I can see from your words and from the artwork you presented that the engagement, so the go deeper inside the topic to a profound meaning on human pain given by the war, actually is something you already accomplished. So this is a good news. I mean, because there's no audience development without audience engagement. Actually, the process is completed when both are done. I can see you put your attention and accent very much on the qualitative dimension, which is the audience engagement. So actually, probably you were pioneer. I'm inclined to think that the brand of the historical museum, as Dominic says, it's something that for some people it's binding somehow. For the people of the art world, or on the other hand, for the people that are strictly interested in historical and not in reinterpretation. But still, I can see a very big work in audience engagement and in a very much value given to the artist as a resource for the audience engagement. So it's quite good. I took a bunch of notes, by the way, for the a good practices book we will build together. So thank you. I would like to ask also to Miss Val Carman, because sorry, but we have you invited a couple of big artists here you work with, and so I would like to, if it's okay for you to ask her opinion, because you, Miss Carman, you have not only one participation, two, because I remember I participated in one of your artworks. I sent a chair, yeah, in Belgium that time. So I would like to know also from your voice, by the vision of the artist, about this audience. What was the reaction of the audience? What did you notice, observe about the audience in the case of your artistic projects within Flanders Fields Museum?
Well, thank you. Two very different times, one 22 years ago and one the other year, so a big gap between them. I think for me, the importance was always engagement with the external world, you know, regardless of who they were, whether they were in the museum or outside of the museum. And so in terms of an audience is a funny word, really, but I know what you mean, because if you've got a place where people come, then they are an audience, they're visitors. But I'm thinking that in the first exhibition that I did in Flanders Fields, it was a strange experience, really, because although the community work was very good and very engaging with people, particularly the Sikh thing was very special because it was spontaneous and I hadn't planned it, and they just arrived one day and I could smell this beautiful curry being made, and I realized that there was someone else in the building where I was working, and they came from England, from Birmingham, near where I live. So that was very special, that moment, because I decided I would make something about them, because they influenced me quite dramatically when I heard their stories. The audience that looked at that they looked at it very differently to my contemporary piece that hung in the museum. They reacted very differently, and I think their responses were different. I spoke to a few people about it, and they could completely engage with the Sikh story. You know, it was very obvious in a way, you know, without too much explanation, it was very obvious. Whereas the piece that hung in the museum was very, well, it was very contemporary. You know, it was about all the things that people need, an architect needs to build a monument. And I was going to take them all away again, and then there'd be another one built, and take them away again. And so it goes on. But I think people found that quite a difficult piece, to be honest. And a lot of people would just walk past it because they couldn't engage with it. Whereas the Sikh thing, they were able to engage with that. Going much further forward to the what was it, Pete?
2018, 2014 when it started.
Oh yes, let's not go there. I did a big journey for the museum for 4 years, taking a big book around all of the British Isles, so people could engage with the big book with all the names in it, and also took the Passchendaele chairs. Now that, in a way, was very much about other people. It was about not an audience. I went to them. They didn't come to me. I went to them, and that was lovely and very special. But the piece of the museum itself, which was, it was interesting you talking about the space, because I wanted to have that white cube space, that particular time. I wanted that big room further down the road. You know, I wanted it to be just mine, even though I didn't own it. I wanted to enclose it because I wanted it to feel very domestic. And the only way I could do that in the museum was to build 4 walls.
Box it up, yeah.
So I did. I don't think that went down too well with everyone, but that was important. Now, the audience who came to that, going back to the question about the audience, it was very interesting, I think, because I spoke to a lot of people about that particular installation, and they really liked the fact that it was about the women left behind, mainly mothers, wives, sweethearts, sisters. It was really about that, and they seem to understand that. They seem to understand that although it was a very poignant piece in terms of the history, it was very much more than that, because we have these huge monuments, names in stone, which are very relevant. I get that. But I think it's what's left behind, the tiny little spaces that actually are huge, you know, which is what the chairs were about. They represent this hole left in a life, in a house, in a home, whatever. And people really engaged with that. They understood it. They thought, yeah, I can see this. So if I got a telegram telling me the person I'd loved had died, I'd have to go home and look at this place, this space that's now a void forever. So it's different.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I saw one hand. Davide? Davide, are you there? No, not anymore. Okay. Please, someone else have some questions?
Okay. I have a question for Pete or Dominic, and it's about the audience issue that you were talking before. What do you think is the role, or will be the role, of social media in making the audience larger or more different? I mean, do you think that social media could play a positive role in this issue, or do you think that maybe this is not the way?
In my experience, social media for our museum works incredibly well to tell stories. We have hundreds of positive comments and likes when we tell a personal story, because it's a very easy way. People understand it immediately, clap into that, and add their part of it. When it comes to like the presentation of an artwork, well, the flat screen doesn't do it justice, and sort of like creates more distance than necessary. Where you don't have that with a communication about a personal story. So little histories from the Great Wall, they get tremendous likes on our social media pages. When we tell something about art, they're only interested in historical paintings, or so it seems. Then we have and when it comes to the residencies, So far, I haven't seen it work, but maybe that's us. Dominic, I don't know. But you will try it now with Sami. See how it goes.
Yeah, well, in that respect, that there is a part of the installation of this year's residency is a sound clip. And in the end, it was decided not to have, because in the museum there is a lot of soundscapes already, and it would interfere with a new soundscape part of the residency. So it was decided to add a QR code, attach a QR code to the installation, and when the visitors have the QR code read, it will lead them to a page on the museum's website where they can hear that specific sound clip. So it's using social media. It's not really social media, but it's using the new this technology. And I'm very curious to see how, because personally, I would have preferred the sound to be an integral part of the installation. Yeah, I think that, but it was the artist's choice to do it this way. So I'm personally very curious to see how it will work.
Thank you.
Okay. So for the future, you are forecasting to involve more and more these kind of tools.
Well, it's there. So it's up to the artist to decide to use it, as we leave so much room. But I don't think any of us would force or push an artist towards the use of social media.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I can see there's a question from Davide. Davide. Okay. Probably the hand is remained there from before. Okay, so we saw a lot of possible practices that your artists used in order to develop this topic of the narrative, of an alternative narrative, which is very much important. And also in Tourisme and Grand Guerre, the book I was told you before, is listed in the final essay of the book as one of the most important of the polarities that we saw in the last year in the museography of war, basically. So actually, I can list some of the activity you did in order to improve this kind of narratives that had a direct impact on the education of the audience. So that's the point, to deal with a different narratives. It is to say, to open up a new level of consciousness for the audience. For example, connecting the museum or institution, exceptionally only in Val Carman case, in spaces which are not strictly museographic, but cherished by the local community for their role in the past. A symbolic and expressive use of material, so they can enrich their functions in memory and the suggestion. So of course, this is the case of Berlin, but also the Hopton wood stone used in Val's installation was a kind of a strong memento of history. As in the case of Fabrice, which was another one of your artists, the role given to the citizen and audiences themselves. They became researcher, diggers in the history. So given an active role to the people to involve them. And also a kind of anti-monumental language, or I should say revision of the monumental language, not to say too much, together with an impermanent character of the artworks, like Nicolas noticed before, give all these instruments together, year by year, they produced many different narratives. And this is a very precious capital. It's a value, I mean, that will be very much important in order to develop an audience which is a little bit slow to be converted, let's say, that in order to use a marketing terms, to convert the audience. Still, it's a richness, a very big richness of languages and voices. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. Maybe now it's the moment to introduce the project of this year.
I would just like to add, Chiara, for I think the precious capital, you say, of the experience we had. We are starting to become aware of that, and on our website we are now developing all the past residencies, giving them a little page. Not it's still only an introduction, but still. Because we realized that this is a great journey, and that a new audience via internet should learn about it, and so we are doing that. And I only have one more slide, which is part or the essential bit of the residency of this year. And Dominic has been following Sami Balogi all through the year, because, as you know, I'm on my way out of the museum. And secondly, and equally important, he is the specialist when it comes to let's say, the unexpected histories of the war, the hidden histories that have to do with the colonial powers. As you know, both Britain and France were the greatest colonizers in the world at that time, and they used that also in the war, and so which is very much part of the work of Sami. I'm just going to say, I'm just going to throw in the invitation for our event in September, and then leave the word to Dominic to maybe say a little more about the work itself, unless you would say, I'd rather not, let's wait until September, but that's the same to me. I'll just give the slide first, oops. Share, and then yes, so we were just here, and then this is part of the new work, which the photograph was taken yesterday, so it was only coming up then. As you can see, it's an exciting, mysterious piece, and basically, I'm showing it to you just to give you this invitation. So Sami Balogi is the 2021 Artist in Residence with a work which has the poetic title, "And to those North Sea waves whispering sunken stories." And it runs as of today until the 2nd of January. So I could have taken a better photograph today of the finished work, but I on purpose didn't want to, because this is an invitation for all the members of the Art for Remembrance. I know you have a little budget for travel, so please use it and come to meet the artist on the 23rd of September. And if you come all that way to the freezing north, you guys from the hot southern part of Europe, come to visit us, and then the following day, after we've met with Sami and talked about his work, we will continue with a visit to the former battlefields. That's something we offer to the members of Art for Remembrance, to show a few, not a lot, a few of the monuments that have been put up in the years after the war and how interesting that is. And then to end at Zeebrugge as part of the Beaufort Art Festival on the Belgian coast, where Sami has also produced a work very near to one of the remnants of the big British memorials that were there, but that were destroyed during the Second World War. And so if you want to do that, you just let us know. And I think the best thing is sending an email to Annick, and she will then know that you're coming. So that's all that I have to say, and I leave the word to Dominique.
Okay, I will not say too much, perhaps, because I think most has to be left for the visit in September. I still hope all the guys from Italy are still wanting to come after they've lost from Belgium the football match in a couple of hours. Yeah, what you see here on Pete's slide is indeed a work in progress. I had the intention to make a new photograph, but the lighting still has to be adjusted, so there is no, well, you have to wait till September to see the finished thing. But what you see is centrally in the installation is a modern interpretation of a so-called Wardian case. And a Wardian case was a kind of terrarium which in the colonial period was used to bring over tropical plants, useful tropical plants from the colonies to the west, to the motherlands. And Sami Baluji uses it as a kind of metaphor for the use of colonial troops in the First World War. And himself being a Congolese, he focuses his attention on the handful of Congolese soldiers who were in Europe during the First World War. Also adding, if you look a little bit to the left, you can see a large brass shell case, which is another point he makes, is he reminds us of the fact that the main use or the main reason why you had these colonies was prime materials. And one of the prime materials in Congo was copper, and that copper was used also to make shells. That's all too brief. Some words about the installation. Now, what we're planning to do on the 23rd of September, well, Sami will be there to explain about his work of art. But, and that's interesting, certainly for what Pete has just explained over the last hour and a half, we will also have Odette Gujabo with us, and Odette Gujabo is the granddaughter of one of these Congolese soldiers whose story inspired Sami Baluji, and whose portrait, you can just see it beyond the glass, the watering case, beyond the terrarium. So a portrait of Albert Kujabo, so the grandfather of Odette, is part of the installation. So Odette will also say how this was remembered in her family. And we'll probably have, I mean, she's intended to come the curator of Beaufort, which is, and again, maybe that shows how things might be changing, which is a contemporary art curator with a big C and a big A, who organizes one of these contemporary art trails. So some of the questions that were asked us as historians and curators of a historical museum, she might be ideal to answer them from the point of view of a contemporary art curator. But I'm looking very much forward to see you all and welcome you all in Ypres on the 23rd of September.
For sure, from Italy, we will have a delegation. Also, this is quite a project because I mean, to deal with history when it's honest as a process means also to keep together all the contradictions and I mean, it's something big to talk about the colonial period. I mean, you were talking about the Belgian colonial period. Okay, so I assume this. So,
But I mean, whether it's the Belgian colonial or the British colonial or the French colonial or the Italian colonial, the system behind it was the same, and military colonialism was an integral part of the imperialist project. So, but you're indeed right. It's expressing very complicated history, and maybe even using art to make complicated history a little bit easier to understand.
that's uncommon and very important. If I thought, Dominic, that in Italy we never use art to talk about our role in the colonial past of Ethiopia, for example. You can never find out sources to study. I had a research last year on the topic, and the last resources I found were fascist books. So from that moment and until now, we never got an institution, a national museum, a university producing something in order to read again this topic. Is something that is still in the national narratives. So the question is national narratives or collateral narratives? And I think your answer is pretty clear, and congrats for this project. That seems amazing, and I think I can't wait, and I think all the Italian team cannot wait to see this beautiful project from real to breathing. Had the chance to breathe it. I mean, I was also now think about, you are very brave. You are able to keep together and to tolerate also the conflictual vision of history through this program, which is something very precious. So thank you very much.
And I've never called it collateral history so far, but I think it's a good word. I think that's our role. We are not a national institution. We are only a museum of a moderate, small provincial town. And so far, one of our former presidents was following this conversation, Jeffers Schoor. I don't know if he's still among us, but they've always allowed us to have that voice, which is well away from the national narrative. And I think it's essential to our work. And of course, being helped by artists is doing good to our hearts. It helps us maintain that stand. And so it's very important that we continue doing it. So yes, please come and see and talk some more. And in the meantime, we will try and get the story of these 20 residencies or so of the past 20 years better accessible to people who are new in this domain or are new to the museum.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, or we can wish the best to Semi Balogi, Dominic, Pete, and also to Mr. Coelho, because he's an artist that can be quite controversial. I saw a performance in which a military was washing the feet of people in order to guest a performance like that. You need a museum with an open mind. I mean, it's quite controversial and important also. So I can see the fitting between you and the Inflander Field Museum, Baptiste.
Yes, yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for noticing that. And that performance went through a lot of ups and downs of select and approvals and etc. It was done in London, and it was quite the task. So I'm glad you noticed that. And yeah, all I can say is I can't wait to have this opportunity with the IFFM Museum. Well, not this performance, but we're going to do some things. Yeah, I have some ideas, but I'm going to leave it also very open. But it's extremely important also because as an artist based in India, I really can't be doing things. I would be, I'm very aware of how my Twitter handles or things have been observed or been marked, etc. from time to time. So it's a great place to be able to say things that I can just say, and it sadly happens in other countries. It's interesting. So really hats off to organizations and places like IFFM. And so yeah, thanks to this opportunity. I can't wait to unfold, and yeah, as I would use the word a bit disturb, maybe in a productive, in a more understanding, in a critical manner. So yeah, thank you. Sorry, I can't. My video is a bit strange, so you can just hear my audio. So, sorry about that.
We hear you all right, Baptiste.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see each other in Belgium, the 23rd of September. It was actually beautiful and inspiring. Thank you, Marina and Alden from Visual Voices, and thank you for all the participants of tonight. Thank you to the Inflander Field Museum to give us so many thoughts to reassemble now and to think about in order to improve our practices. We will really love to continue the conversation in the next events of the project, so inviting everybody to stay connected to these talks of us in order to improve each other together. And thank you again. It was very, very much important to you allow us to dig into your practices. So we also had the chance to focus on particularly methodological aspects of your work, which are very much important. So thank you again.
Thank you for sharing this meeting, Chiara, as always.
It was a pleasure.